Welcome to Startup Anthology, a podcast that shares stories from employees and middle managers, not just the founders, at early and mid-stage startups. These stories from employees showcase the unique experiences and the pivotal roles they have played in creating startup culture. I'm your host, Jeremy Willis. In this first episode, I will be speaking with Henry Wang. Henry is a mechanical engineer who was raised in Santa Clara, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, where he attended Santa Clara University. Henry has over 20 years of experience working at 5 different startups. Today, we will be discussing his background and the lessons he has learned during his career. Let's get started. Well, this is the first Startup Anthology recording ever with Henry Wang.
Wow, I'm so honored.
It's just an idea we have of talking about the relationships and the stories that people have and that work in the startup life.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be here.
So who are you, Henry?
Yeah, my name's Henry. I'm 49 years old. So I graduated college at Santa Clara University with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering in 1996. And so graduating in the middle of Silicon Valley in the late 90s was pretty cool. It was a fun time and a boom time. And so I knew I always wanted to be in some type of technology. So I definitely got really lucky growing up in that area and graduating in that area. And so me and all my college buddies, we stayed, of course. And, many of my friends are actually from the Bay Area anyways, but it was a fun time to be in Silicon Valley working as an engineer during the .com boom and seeing these strange companies with strange names like Google and Yahoo get started. And so that's where my professional career started. And, I joined a company called Flextronics, which is a contract manufacturer, as like a process engineer. I interned there, so that's how I ended up landing there. And it was great. I learned a lot about manufacturing and design and a whole host of things. I was there for quite a while. Well, 4 years.
Do you want to go into startups, or is it just kind of like because you're in that area, it just kind of felt
Yeah, I mean, that was actually a big, huge multinational company. And that's all I knew at that time is a huge company. But I actually had a great mentor there who was my manager. He became a good mentor. And I remember I was starting to hit on around 4 years. So I'm 26? And I asked him well, where do I go from here? What's my next step? And he told me, you know what? You got to leave this company. And I was really shocked and taken aback.
Really said you got to leave this company?
Yeah. And I thought, oh man, do you not want me at this company? I thought we had a pretty good relationship. But what he meant was that that was 1999 or so. I mean, that was the peak of the stock market and the .com boom.
Yeah.
And it was nuts. And, startups everywhere. Pets.com was going public or whatever. And, all this stuff. And so that's how he explained it to me. If you want to grow, if you want to get yourself in a position where instead of working for your money, your money's working for you. And so there was this obviously financial, monetary aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in Silicon Valley and you see 25-year-olds in a Ferrari next to you at the stoplight. And you see, it was just crazy how people were making all this money. And so, of course, everyone wanted to go to startup. So yeah, I ended up landing a startup that I knew because I had it as a customer. And it was a telecommunications startup that was right around the year 99 or 2000. So it was peak startup craziness. Things have changed, but then things also have not changed. So yeah, I went to a startup and that went under in about 2 years. I joined another one. Now, by that time, the .com boom turned into a .com bust. That was after the crazy fall in the stock market in whatever that was, 2000, 2001.
Yeah, early 2000.
And then terrible time to try to be working and looking for a job. So I joined another startup that went under and decided to do some business with my father. So we did some small business work and taught me a lot about just small business and entrepreneurialism. But then I ended up deciding to get my MBA. And then I had a friend call me from Apple if I wanted to join. So I get back into the corporate grind at Apple. And I actually welcomed it. I think I was ready to go back in a weird sense. And that was a great experience in terms of, but it was very difficult. And then after that, I got an opportunity to get into Tesla in the early days in 2011. And so that was just a crazy time. I learned a lot. Lots of stories. And then did several startups after that.
How many startups have you been in?
5.
That's a lot.
Yeah. But it's not that much for people in the Silicon Valley because they go to a different startup every year and a half. So,
right.
But anyways, so yeah, here I am today.
Well, a little background on us. I met Henry here in Austin.
That was 2020.
Right during the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
I think the first time I met Henry was on a Google Meet
Oh yeah, at least I started the company remotely. So that was a challenging time in April of 2020.
I just remembered like, hey, his background looks just like mine.
It's a crazy time.
So do you have any out of those five startups that you worked at, like anyone that's like particularly interesting or comes to mind on a good story, background, like what you learned?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, all of them I learned something from and I gained relationships from and was a different experience. But then all of them had some common overlap as well. Pace of work, the hours you put in, the ownership that you need to take at a startup versus being more structured role in a huge company.
Well, okay, so that's one thing I wanted to bring up too is like roles and responsibilities and actually job description.
Mm.
So there's a big difference between what you get hired for
Yeah.
and what you actually do.
Yeah.
What is one of those biggest like shockers to you that you're like, hey, I got hired to do this, but then I end up actually having to do
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z?
That's definitely a common theme with every startup I've been at, where, first of all, a lot of startups, they don't even have a job description, or it's because, like, I knew someone there and they're like, hey, we should hire this guy, Henry. And then they write a job description for me later. But almost always, no matter what the situation is for the job description, they want to leverage your skills and whatever you bring value to the company. But yeah, I definitely end up doing all kinds of strange things in every startup I've been at. I would say the other things that I would end up doing were usually more menial grunt work. And I think that's a common theme. It's like you come in, like, oh, you're gonna be adding all this value and doing all this really incredible work. Then you find out you're putting labels on a shipping box because something has to be shipped real quick and there's no one else that can do it, or you volunteer.
Right. Yeah. So you worked at Tesla and then you moved on to another company after that.
Yeah, this another electric vehicle startup called NIO. Yeah, I like to talk about that. That's it kind of ran the gamut, a typical startup, or not typical startup experience, but it had a lot of elements that were, you know, ups and downs and trials and tribulations.
How'd you get to Neo?
Yeah, at the time, I was almost hitting the 5 year mark at Tesla. And like a lot of people know, being at an Elon company is very difficult. And the fact that I lasted almost 5 years is pretty incredible. And, it kind of, you get burned out. And there's a point where you have to figure, and I was in this situation where, am I going to take on a different role to have a change of scenery at the company? Or am I going to see if I can somehow scale back the workload? But that's pretty much impossible. Or do I leave the company? So, I took a lot of thought into it and I decided to leave the company. I definitely could have stayed. I'd been there long enough where I kind of know where to pick my spots. I think most people who are at startups may spend an initial time just underwater, treading water, and
Trying to figure out where they fit?
yeah, where they fit, how they manage their time. Especially when you join a company or a startup, you want to try to do everything. But then most people find out they can't accomplish everything that they want to accomplish. And then there's also the part of trying to figure out how to get things done at that company with the resources that you're given.
So at Neo, what were things that you were able to get done and accomplish? Like achievements, milestones that you're kind of like,
There's a couple. One of them is building a team from scratch, which was really rewarding. I thought was really fun. It was started with
was it a specific team or?
yeah, me and one other individual who I worked with at Tesla, who's the one who brought me into Neo or introduced me.
Okay.
Because he left for Neo about 4 months prior to me. And him and I worked really well when we were at Tesla. And so we thought, hey, let's join forces at this other company. And now we're going from individual contributors to now we are upper management. And so at this startup,
Middle management.
yeah, or middle management.
Yeah, yeah.
And even though Neo was based in Shanghai and had probably at least, maybe 1,500 people there, it had only started about, I think, a year and a half prior to when I joined, maybe even less.
How many people they have here in the States?
It was around, I'm trying to remember. It might have been in the 20s. So I was probably employee number 29 to 39, somewhere around there. And so it was very much like a startup within a startup. And they had already started a design house in Munich, Germany, because there were a lot of ex-BMW people who joined the company.
Interesting.
So we had really these three elements. Shanghai for scale and manufacturing and engineering, Silicon Valley for engineering prowess, and then Munich for automotive design. So we were trying to distribute the teams according to their local talents.
That's interesting to me because it's like we got not only three different time zones, but you have three different cultures, three different like work ethics, three different of all trying to mesh together in one company.
Yeah, it formed a lot of friction and tension at times. it's difficult to
Communication too.
and communication.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to make that all work. But yeah, there's one of the things I was very proud of is like being whatever employee number 30 something at this company and being able to build a team with someone who I work really well with. And so, it starts off with the two of us and we eventually, I think, built the team to like around almost 70 people. And I was involved in hiring every single one of those people. It was a lot of work, especially at the beginning. All I did was recruiting and interview people. And because we had work to be done, we knew that we wanted to build a car, a new electric vehicle. However, we didn't have the team to do it. And so we had to strategically pick the first hires and each phase, which hires are we going to hire?
How did you narrow that down? How did you know which phase you're going into and like find the people to fit that role?
Yeah, I mainly followed kind of the product development phases. So
Okay.
for example, I'm not going to hire a manufacturing person as the first hire because we have nothing to manufacture. So the first phases of hiring were all in design and engineering. And then after that, more about testing. And after that, more about system integration. And then, there's all kinds of hardware and software people involved. And then in the middle of that, some program management and then some more manufacturing support type of people and quality people. So that we kind of had to always fly the airplane and build it at the same time.
Okay.
Which is a common mantra in startup life.
Common startup theme.
Yeah.
So any of those people that you hired, still in contact with them today, or?
Yeah. I would say pretty much every single startup I've been at, stemming back 20 years ago, I'm friends with a number of them. And I think that's what's special because, in a startup, I always describe it as like you're in this boat. It's probably like a wooden boat with a bunch of holes in it. And I feel like you're with this people on a mission and you're trying to survive. And everyone's just trying to plug all these holes at different spots, different places. And every time you plug a hole, a new one appears. And so you're trying to keep the boat from sinking. And then, the boat grows, of course, metaphorically. But I don't know. To me, I've always used that analogy with being at a startup.
And you talked about earlier that it was burnt out at Tesla or like time to move on. How did you de-stress and how did you move on? Like, how did you get through those?
I think everyone has their own method. I think you have to have a life outside of that work. A lot of people tie their identity to their work, and that's okay. That's not me. I think I've always been consumed in my work and made it a priority. I've always taken pride into it. Always want to do my best. But at the end of the day, it's not my number one priority is my own health and well-being and my family. But so I think with the stresses of a startup, I think everyone should find something that brings them happiness outside of work. For me, I love to golf. And so like, that's kind of my happy place. And I think that's a great way to de-stress for me.
Find a hobby, find something to do, some other priority for yourself that's not just.
Yeah, that brings you happiness and puts you in a space where you're present during that hobby, where you're not constantly thinking about work. Of course, getting away is great too, like taking holidays and stuff like that. But that's always difficult when you're at a startup and you feel like I can't go on holiday because I got to work and we have deadlines. And it looks bad if I go take off to Mexico for 2 weeks when everyone else is working. So it's this like weird circular function.
That is a weird dynamic because I actually felt that a lot in the startup world. It's like, I felt it both ways. Like you see someone go take vacation, like, oh man, they're having vacation. I'm saying, no, we have all this work to do.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, how do I get to take vacation? And then like the guilt of taking vacation while you're taking vacation. Like I felt that. I don't know if that's.
And most people, when they're on vacation, they still have work in their mind, especially those last couple of days where you're going to come back to 1,000 emails and your meetings and everything.
Yeah, Slack messages.
And that's a big thing about startups is that like your incentive structure is very different usually than a structured big company. It's like the opposite of clocking in and clocking out. Your incentive structure revolves around probably some type of mission statement and some type of unified goal, shipping a product or building a company or something as cheesy as making the world a better place and all that stuff. And there's also the incentive of, let's be real and honest. Part of a reason for joining a startup is that it could be a big financial windfall for you in the future.
Yeah.
And I think that, for some people that is the number one reason, but even if it's like your number 10 reason, it's a reason. Like
it's still there.
Yeah, it's still there. I would challenge anyone to say it's not on their mind at all when they're at a startup, because if you're at a startup and you're thinking like, well, I'm trading in a lot of my time and sacrifice for equity in the company, sure would be nice if that equity turns into a financial windfall for me and my family and open up some other options.
Yeah, that is like a big risk too, because you put all your time and effort into for that equity, for that windfall.
Yeah.
But then like double-edged sword, if you don't put all your time and effort into it, you might not get a windfall because the company might not.
Yeah.
At least at the early stages.
Yeah. And I've always viewed it as more of like a bonus thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can honestly say that every startup I've joined, I really joined because it felt like it would advance my career and it would grow my career. That was always the number one reason. And plus, the chance to work on some great product.
The new.
Yeah, I've been very grateful. I've been very lucky. I've been in the great fortune to have worked on, some of the most incredible advanced products in the world. And so that was always a big motivation. And I always viewed the financial part as kind of like gravy or the cherry on top, just
Yeah.
a bonus. And that I never focused on that was a requirement, more like if it happens, that would be awesome. If it doesn't, I walk away with probably a lot more growth and trajectory, an upward trajectory in my career.
I had when I was interviewing first for it was either this is going to be a helicopter that flies over your house, drops little bags of money all the time.
Yeah.
Or you're going to have some great bullet points on your resume.
Yeah.
So it's like win-win either way. Like,
yeah.
So that helps with career development and everything. With working at Neo, just kind of change the subject a little bit. Did the company celebrate success? Like, did y'all celebrate like wins and achievements of those milestones? And like,
yeah, it was good. We had we obviously had a CEO of the company, but we had quote like a CEO of the U.S. I guess subsidiary, and she really focused on culture and trying to instill that. And, one thing that I took away from that, which I really liked, is that we would have these little happy hours. It was usually at the company, typical stuff, startup stuff. You bring in a keg and some chips or whatever. And we had them quite a bit. At first, we had them like every week when we were like 45 people. And
it's relatively cheap to do.
Yeah, it's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And then when we grew more and more, then turned into like every 2 weeks, then every month, and then every quarter when we were like 500 people in that office and we had to expand. But regardless, it was typically, I think, on a Friday afternoon. But she made a big point that like go mingle with people who are not in your department, and because it's easy for you to kind of mingle in your own clique because you're comfortable with your team members. And when you do meet someone in another department, try not to introduce yourself with your job title. Introduce yourself as, hey, I'm John. I play sand volleyball and I'm in a volleyball league. And you might find someone else who's also interested in volleyball. And everyone actually bought in. Everyone made a point to never describe their job title or anything. And the goal was to get to know people as people. Because at the end of the day, we are not, and we should not be defined as our job titles. We should be defined by our people. And, you could be a great proud father of 3 or whatever. And I still take that to this day, is that like people are people and not job titles.
That is interesting because like being in a startup, it's like the new thing and everyone wants to know about it. Oh, I am so-and-so at this startup.
Yeah.
And your identity gets wrapped up with the identity of the company. It's really kind of fun to go somewhere and you start introducing yourself and then you say, I work at this company, and they're like, oh, that's the hot new thing. Tell me all about it.
Yeah.
And then you get like, oh, I get a little ego bump on that.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, your identity can now get captured in that. And like, so yeah, I've experienced that. That's it's a very, not dangerous, but a very touchy thing to like, cause you get lost.
Yeah, you get lost. A startup is really comprised of a bunch of people trying to do something. And so at Neo and at some other startups, I was at Neo long enough where we launched our first vehicle, our first product.
Oh, cool.
Which is super rewarding. Like anytime you're at a startup where you get to be part of like your first product launch, it's pretty amazing because you go from 0 to 1 to 100. And because you know that you are a part of building the team, whether you're an individual contributor or whether you're in management, you both have very important roles in contributing and knowing that, especially in this case, this is a car that's sold to the public. So it's kind of neat to like go to a launch event or see the car on a public road. And even if you only design the light switch on the driver's side door or whatever, well, you had a part in making that happen.
Everyone touches that light switch at night.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really cool.
That's definitely one of the big motivations for me, is the reward of completing a product and deploying it in some way and it getting used by people, whether they're like test customers or hopefully someday selling it at volume. To me, that's one of the biggest rewards of being at a startup.
So anyone at Neo annoy you or aggravate you? And
yeah, it was a lot of stuff there. I think I helped build a great team, and I'm really proud of the team I helped build. We had some great people, and it really felt like a family. It was really great. Everyone was friendly. I think everyone had a lot of great character, and everyone was really enthusiastic about working there. We had lots of great dinners and lunches, and I traveled a bit. So, when you travel with coworkers, you get to know them a lot.
Yeah.
It's fun. And especially, I traveled to foreign countries with my coworkers at Neo. And so, yeah, when you're staying in the same hotel and eating dinner and doing all that stuff, all the lunches, you build a lot of relationships that way. But I think at Neo, one thing I discovered was that things are good until they're not. And so even though we had lots of great characters and people, and I still have pictures on my computer of all these dinners and happy hours, and sometimes we throw like, a bowling day or, fun activities. But there was a lot of drama as well. And that's why I say like, hey, everything is really great until it's not. And I helped fire some people, and there were some conflicts and personnel conflicts that I had to diffuse. And I think I experienced a lot of that at Neo, enough where like, but it was good. It helped me grow as a manager.
Do you anticipate that? Like those like relationships that were good until they're not?
I did not.
Kind of surprising.
Yeah, it was surprising to me. And I think, it could have been because I was also a new manager.
Okay.
And so, and I went through management training and stuff, but I still enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed bringing the people together, connecting the dots, and kind of steering the ship. It took a lot. Like, it was at times I felt more like a psychologist or a therapist most of the time. But we had young people, we had older people, we had junior people, senior folks. There were some instances where like we had to walk someone out the door due to some very bad behavior, and that was not anticipated. Like when we hired that person, like I never would have thought it would have resulted in that. And it's there were some people that were super nice, and then there were some external factors that were involved, and that ended their employment there, voluntarily or involuntarily. And then so when each time this happens, I had to help pick up the pieces and keep the team going and keep the morale. And that was a big part of being there. I think you learn a lot about people and society and personalities. And when you put a group of people together, whether it's on an island or in a company, you're going to have, I guess, misalignment.
Was there a noticeable change between when you started as the company grew and developed, of like the type of personalities that showed up the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of that was something I learned at Tesla, where most startups start off like a family, and it's really kumbaya, and everything is loving and everything. As you add more personalities, you're going to get more personality conflicts. You're going to get more egos. I've noticed this at every startup I've been, that I was a part of the growth period, in that the more people there are, the more bureaucratic it becomes, the more political it becomes, the more territorial it becomes. And unfortunately, every startup I've been at that grew, it headed that direction. I've never heard of a situation where a startup didn't eventually become the big bureaucratic political machine that all the big companies become.
That no one wants it to be.
Yeah, no one wants it to be.
That's why they go to a startup.
Yeah. And then, exactly. And usually all these phases are pretty predictable. The egos and the personalities.
Is it based on time or based on amount of people, or?
It's a function of time and headcount, I would say.
Okay.
The more people there are, the more difficult it is to keep personalities working. And then you have, I would say, jealousy and envy when certain people come in, and let's say that person has a higher title than you. And then you're thinking, well, that person has less experience than I do. How come they got hired as a senior staff electrical engineer or whatever? And there's usually reasons for that. Maybe the company had to give him or her that title to bring them into that startup. And then people start learning about pay gaps, and so had more stock options than me, and there's conflicts that way. And then territorial grabs, power grabs. I'd say empire building.
Like empire building within the company, like trying to grab their little piece of that pie.
And every startup I've been at, I got to say, a lot of it is the upper management. They come in, and I see this all the time. There's going to be people who come in and they want to bring all their own people and build their own empire. And then there are silos that are created. So it's challenging trying to put that at bay and
trying to navigate that.
Trying to navigate that.
The politics it's hard.
Yeah.
Just trying to figure out what to say, when to say, who you can say it to and who you can't say it to. And then,
who your allies are. And, unfortunately, even at a startup, it's all about who you know, of course. If you're in the good graces of someone very high up, you probably have some leeway and some things come your way. But if you're not, you're not. Your life,
days.
Your life may be detrimented at that startup, or you might not be there any longer.
So what made you leave Neo? Like, what was that started that?
Yeah,
exit.
I think at around the 3-year mark, I was starting to feel disenfranchised and burned out. I didn't like the direction the company was going. There was always this kind of overbearing headquarter regime at the company.
In Shanghai?
Yeah, in Shanghai. And so, and they did what they had to do, of course, to manage the company. I wasn't happy about that. So then that changes your workflow and the meaning of your work. And then, I was commuting a lot. I was commuting about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half each way by car. I was I was driving myself, and
that eats into your personal
yeah,
time.
it eats into your personal time a lot. Before that, I had ridden corporate shuttles like at Tesla and Apple. So at least, in the Bay Area, if you're familiar with, there's all these corporate shuttles everywhere, whether it's Google or Facebook, and they shuttle employees all over the Bay Area. So at least, yeah, you can have an hour commute each way, but at least you can do it in a luxury bus with leather seats and Wi-Fi. So it's not like,
So you continue working.
yeah, you continue working, or you can take a nap. But, I think most people who have commuted by car by themselves, there's a big difference between driving a car by yourself or maybe sitting on a train, a metro, or a bus. It's, even if it's the same amount of time,
Traffic a factor down in the Bay
yeah,
Area.
the focus, yeah, the traffic, and it's most people would rather be able to sit on a metro or a bus,
Yeah.
and not have to deal with that stuff. And that was a big part of it too. I was like, gosh, I've been doing this commute for a while, and it really started cutting into like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. That was a big part of it.
A lot of time to ponder what was going on too.
Yeah, I listened to a lot of podcasts. I talked on the phone a lot, and so and it just so happens that the company was going through some not reorgs, but a little bit of restructuring, just trying to cut costs. They were going to really cut costs in the US and Europe. And so I ended up being a member of a part of the reduction in force anyways.
Okay.
And so it was kind of a blessing in disguise. So I got this nice severance. I was going to quit anyways. It worked out actually really well.
Yeah. Are you in contact with those people still that you left with? Or
Yeah. I have dinner with them once in a while when I'm in the Bay Area.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah. Because, we built a great team and a great bond. And that's one of the best things about being at a startup is that, like, no matter what happens there, no matter what happens to the company or what happens to your employment there, you all can always maintain these relationships and have lunch and hang out and, talk on the phone. And these are relationships that you could probably either have for a long time or even for life.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking back when I was working for you, I was in the Glorious Hardware channel. And that was, when I changed departments and went somewhere else, it was like a big deal to leave just that Slack channel.
Yeah.
And then when another guy left, he shared all his memes with me
Mm.
that he had been posting in that channel for the past, 3 or 4 years that he was
funny.
there. So, yeah, the development of those relationships. And I still talk to those people. I still talk to you.
It's still fun.
Yeah.
And what's fun about it is that, like, you're removed from the stresses of that startup. I mean, yes, you don't have the camaraderie of like going to battle every day and trying to solve those problems and deal with all the issues. At the same time, it's kind of nice, having that experience behind you, and you can just talk as people.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, everyone goes through a hard time, like a stressful time, be it military or stressful work, whatever. And I'm not saying that it's like the military, but it's like still stressful. You create bonds with people that become either lifelong friendships, but it's really interesting. It's a lot of fun to look back on those times that were stressful and actually reminisce of those things.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of startup life has parallels to real life issues and crises. And, in your personal life, you have all kinds of crises that you go through the years, whether it's a relationship or you and your family are moving, or your car broke down in the middle of nowhere, or your pipes broke in your house. And these are things that you may not have experienced before. And they're very, very stressful. It's hard to focus and concentrate, but most people get through them all. I think as people, we learn how to get through those tough times in life, and hopefully they make you smarter. And I feel a lot of startup life is like that, where, I mean, I can't count the number of times each startup where I wanted to quit, or I was like, you know what, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to get fired, or, something like that. And so there's
worst case scenario.
Yeah. And maybe you could chart it on a graph. It's up and down. And there are times at a startup where you can look back and think, oh my gosh, that 3 months in, the year 2013, and when we were trying to fix all those test issues, that was the worst time of my life. But we all come out of it. I think that's what's great about a startup, is that it typically tests your limits.
Brought it back to personal life. Did the startup life affect your personal relationships outside of work?
Yeah, I mean, it affected it in terms of the time commitment and how it occupies your brain. Because there were plenty of times where I didn't feel like I could go on holiday or go somewhere because I felt like, there's too much work to do, and and maybe that was a little on me too. Like, I want to show that I'm always pulling my weight. Like, I never want to be the person where people in the office think, oh, he's in the lower tier of whatever. I want to always be in the top tier. Like, I always want to be the person, and not just for external optics, but like, I take pride in that. Like, I don't ever want to be someone who's remotely slacking off, or even, I'd like to operate at a 9 or 10 all the time. So that, that's a lot of stress. And also, it just, I think sometimes I would talk to people, friends or whatever, friends who had jobs that had a lot of work-life balance, and they were clocking in, clocking out, and never took work home, maxed out all the vacation time.
Right.
And sometimes they would ask me like, "Oh, come on, just take off that Friday. Let's golf, or let's go to Vegas. Just take Friday off. We'll leave Thursday, come back Sunday or whatever." And there are a lot of times when I'm like, you know what? I can't do that. I cannot take that day off.
Yeah.
And I don't think they understood why. They thought, what could be so important that you can't just take one measly day off?
Is it the startup culture? Is it the culture at that company, or is it the drive to achieve and maintain that 9 or 10 that did it, or is it a combination? Or
I think it's a combination, but a lot of it is the startup culture. There's this kind of like expectation and usually a shaming if you're not like,
shaming?
yeah, if you're not operating at that high level. Because at a lot of startups, especially at really prestigious startups, one thing I've noticed that a lot of really great startups, 80 to 90% of those people could be rock stars at any other company. Like it's a whole company of very high caliber people. And so by nature, I mean, that's by design. Startups cannot afford to have any deadwood or people who aren't adding as much value as they should. And so I think when you get that group of people together, you're also trying to produce the most work possible in the shortest period of time. And if you want to produce the best results with the least amount of people in the shortest period of time, that means everyone has to be rowing the boat at the same pace. You don't want to be the weak link, of course.
Yeah.
And so,
or perceived weakly.
Or perceived to be the weak link. Yeah. And I think there's two more aspects. At most startups, there's not a lot of redundancy. It's not like you have
That's true.
redundant duplicate positions of every position. And so if you are the integration engineer for that subsystem, chances are you're the only one and you have all the code and the keys and all the knowledge. And so if you're not there, things fall apart. And if the company can't afford a 1 or 2 day slip in the schedule, then yeah, you need to be there because there is no replacement for it. No one can just like take over. You'll be gone for a couple of weeks.
Everyone has a bespoke role.
Yeah.
That they're trying to do. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Like, me and my experience has been like, you get so caught up in that mentality that when there starts becoming redundant roles, you feel like it's waste.
Yeah.
Like you feel like it's like, oh, I still need to figure out how to do their job, my job, and their job, because who knows if they're on vacation or whatever, and come to a point where like that never happened. That's like no longer the thing, and so you get overworked once you get to a certain phase.
Yeah, and I think one of the unfortunate byproducts of this element of a startup is that most people lose their sense of boundaries, and they're not able to establish their boundaries. So it's kind of a vicious cycle in a way, and of course that's not healthy.
Well, it's vulnerability. I guess it's like you go to a startup when you're like within the first 20, 25 employees, everybody. You have everyone. You do a morning stand up, and the stand up is you and the entire other 20 people there. And that's including the CEO, the founders.
Yeah.
And you allow yourself to be vulnerable with them. They allow you to be vulnerable with them as well. And then it changes. And you don't know when. It just does.
Yeah. And it's a vicious cycle also because the more you volunteer yourself and the more you give yourself, the more the company usually takes. Partially because they know that you're dependable and reliable, which is great, but then you also set yourself up doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Well, it's like, okay, this was the boundary at, year 1. Now I'm going to expand my boundary a little bit here at year 2. 3, okay, we're in a good role, but then now come year 4, year 5, whatever you're at, I need to take it all the way back.
Yeah.
Not realize that I need to be that exposed.
And that's a good point. I think being able to establish those boundaries and being able to pick your spots at a startup after year 2, 3, 4, whatever, I think is a big part of the evolution. Most people cannot run at 100% duty cycle at a startup for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. Yeah. It's just humanly not very possible.
And if you're still it's still a startup at 10 years, you probably should leave.
Yeah. And so most people, almost as like a self-preservation thing, they have to start establishing those boundaries or dialing it back a little bit, knowing that, hey, they've earned their stripes and they've paid their dues. And the good thing is that they probably become more efficient. And that something that was very difficult before, but now that you know everyone, you know the path of least resistance, and you know how to get stuff done and who to go to, life usually becomes a little bit easier.
Well, with that is because we're bad at setting boundaries, we jump from startup to startup, or is it because of like, oh, okay, I reached it's no longer a startup anymore? And it's like I want to go back to that challenge of
There's usually two reasons. One, the first reason a lot of times is that is the skill set match. There's a lot of people. There are people who are best when they're employee number 1 to 150. Like they can do things quickly. They can do things with lack of process. They can navigate twists and turns, and they actually enjoy that. But when it gets bigger and bigger, when things become maybe a little less creative and it's more about sustaining and trying to scale, they may be unhappy. And I've seen that a lot, where those people start to leave because they're like, well, I came in here for the early stages and I like that stage, but now it's becoming more, there's more processes, corporate, all this stuff. And now I don't get to create one of my new designs because we're just trying to make the current design more reliable and build a million of them. I'm bored. I'm out of here. So that's pretty common. Yeah, I think that's a big common reason. In contrast, there are people who are not suited for that early stage, and they're more suited for the later stages of growth and scale and working on reliability and quality, and that's their forte. To answer the question of like people who maybe hop around, part of it could be like just the challenge thing about having a new challenge, and you may get bored.
Well, the horizon's not usually that long either.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I mean, like 3, 4, maybe 5 years at a particular company, and then you're moving on anyway.
Yeah, and you'll probably know whether you want to stay. Or actually, another big reason is that someone may feel like they're not growing at that company and they're stagnant. And let's say they have goals of attaining different skills or, becoming a manager or a senior manager or whatever. So they feel like, well, it's not in the cards for me at this current startup. I'm going to have to make a move somewhere else.
Okay. Junior level IC to middle manager to maybe director.
Yeah.
You probably can't say the same.
Yeah.
That makes sense. The other thing, it actually thought about the conversation we had at one of our first Fridays is like, there's a point in the stage of a startup is like where everyone's a generalist.
Yeah.
Everyone can do everything.
Yeah.
And then that's what we need at this point is a generalist. And then there'll be a transition to these specialized specific roles that we have more of those type of specific people, but these generalist people don't fit in that. Vice versa, the specialist doesn't fit in the generalist mold.
Yeah.
So depending on the stage of life of the company, it's kind of, you can find it kind of fit that. For me personally, I realized that I'm a generalist that can do a lot of things really well, but not great.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if that's your thing, that's your thing.
Yeah.
Like you want to be in the right spot to be successful.
Yeah.
And that's a good point where like when a company gets bigger and they need more of these specialists and they need those specialists to stay in their lane, there's people who don't want to do that. So they find it difficult. Some other thoughts I had was how like a lot of times there becomes a division between the founders and the rest of the company, because usually you want to, especially at the beginning, people want to do well at that startup. They're motivated. But I sometimes see like, I don't know if it's an unfortunate dynamic where like some employees may feel like they're trying to pursue the founder's dreams and not their own dreams. How do founders of a company convey that we're all in this together? You're not trying to fulfill my lifelong work. I think it's challenging both ways, because founders, whether there's one of them or 6 of them, they realize that their dream cannot be pursued without all these people.
Yeah.
And these people are very important, especially the first like 100 people in a startup, I would say, are very important. Those, a lot of times they set the culture. They hire more people. Some of our managers, so they have a lot of guidance and influence on the company. I think it's challenging. That's one thing I've experienced. Is that how do you feel like whether you're a junior individual contributor and that you're just as excited as the founders are?
Did you ever see or did you experience this as you moved from a junior individual contributor to senior contributor and then to a manager? How like that role changed and like was it your expectation the same? Like one thing that comes to mind is like when I started, it was an individual contributor, right? I had this idea for making this other department and like, cool, I'll make this work. And then crap, now I'm having to hire and manage people. And it's kind of like, I don't necessarily know how to do that yet, but then you learn on the fly. But it's like that transition period.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference in mentality, because when you're an individual contributor, you feel that you are overworked and underpaid.
Fair.
And then when you're a manager, you feel that your employees are not working enough and overpaid. So it's an interesting dynamic. Yeah, it's completely switched.
Perspective.
And that's one thing I learned also in like being a small business owner or entrepreneur. Those pens and pencils and supplies, like as an owner, you got to pay for all that stuff.
Yeah.
But when you're at a company, you're like, oh, yeah, these You just go into a supply cabinet and you grab whatever you need.
Do this locker over here.
You're not having to pay for every piece of paper or pad or whatever. And it's kind of the same thing. Things are very different when you're on the other side, and hopefully, whatever side you're on, you're able to empathize, especially if you've been on both sides.
I have noticed that like sometimes people look back and say, "Oh, they don't do anything anymore because they're a manager," and you're like, "What?
Yeah.
You don't understand how many meetings I've been in and how I have on your behalf helped you do this. Help this happen.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. It's like a lot of those things, and that's what's strange too. At least in my perspective, is like individual contributor called out, praised, and told, you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
By everyone if they see you.
Yeah.
You go to a manager, and your peer group is smaller.
Yeah.
And then there's politics, there's stuff like that. Your subordinates don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Hopefully you know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then it's just kind of like, and if you're not used to not getting that praise, not being that accolades, it can be tough.
Yeah, especially that's a good point where like going into management, you want to give your employees the praise and the acknowledgement, but then you usually have to take the blame when things don't go well. And I'm a firm believer that I'm okay with that. I actually I feel like that's a big part of being a leader and a manager, is that taking ownership of the functions of a team. If things didn't go right, did I put my employees in a position to succeed? Because if not, that's my failure and my responsibility to
it's different. It's like that first month.
Yeah.
Going from individual contributor to a manager, it's just like, it's shocking.
Yeah. And there is that similar dynamic of like, whether it's a startup, where a startup is similar to a big company, where there's always going to be a divide between,
very distinct divide.
Yeah. Between the different hierarchies of the company. I don't think there's really a good way around that. Every company, when you think about it, society is like that as well. Unfortunately, there are the haves and the have-nots, and it's been like that since all of civilization, and that's not going to change. So just like at a company, there is a hierarchy, and usually people at the top have different privileges than people at the bottom.
That's one big way to, like, what a startup is defined as.
Yeah.
In the startup culture, at least. Flat.
Yeah.
Flat hierarchy, flat chain of command or whatever.
Yeah.
Flat hierarchy. No longer is flat. It kind of starts to go horizontal, then move vertical. And when you're used to this for 2-3 years, and then it's shocking.
Yeah, if you're used to, as an individual contributor, being in meetings with the CEO and the exec staff, and then later you're now 3 or 4 levels down from them, and you don't have that close relationship anymore. It affects things a lot. Some people take it well and just fine and feel like, hey, I don't want to like exposure there. Like I'd rather stay a couple degrees away from the heat. But some people feel like, hey, I don't like that. I don't like having to go through these different layers. It's hard to manage. It is difficult, no matter who you are, whether you're at the bottom or the top.
Well, that's another thing I wanted to ask. Depending on where you come in at a startup, sometimes you come in as a junior individual contributor at the beginning, but then you come in a little bit later stage, not like first 25, but you come 25 to 50.
Yeah.
And then you try to come in and manage a team. Yeah. How's that?
Another kind of salient point is that, like, I have seen on almost every startup I've been at, because they're trying to grab people, and there are plenty of inexperienced people who get hired, and then, for various reasons, they get promoted. Everyone's moving fast. They're probably not ready. And that happens a lot in startups. I'm trying to pinpoint like why. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons, whether it's nepotism or whether it's just how things work.
Or is it, I don't have an exit strategy for people.
Well, there is another element where a lot of startups can't afford to hire experienced management. So they may hire someone who's inexperienced, and it's like, oh, well, now we're growing. Now that team of 1 or 2 people is now 8 people. Well, they need a manager because you can't have them all reporting to the same people. So then you promote one of those individual contributors who was a peer, and now they're a manager. And then I've seen a lot of conflicts there, where all of a sudden your peer becomes your manager. Sometimes you might be fine with it because you're like, yeah, I'd love to work for you. I'm totally cool with that. I think you'd be a great in that position. And then there's the other side where, what, this person shouldn't have been promoted. It should have been me, or
jealousy or whatever.
Jealousy or envy, or there's a lack of respect. Like, well, I don't respect this person's skills. Like, they don't know how to manage. Like, they've never been a manager before. And then later there's all kinds of conflicts. I see that a lot in startups. Actually, it's
Have you experienced it like directly?
A little bit, yeah. Where It's a pretty common thing with startups.
Mhm.
I've noticed where people are unhappy with management that either gets brought in or gets promoted within because there's this, and being a leader or a manager is very difficult. And it's, it's not just like trying to check off things from a to-do list.
Right. It's not just valuations and pay.
Mm.
It's more.
Yeah. And trying to incentivize your people, keep everyone happy, shield, you mentioned like shielding everyone. It's a tough job. And it's not something that most do really, really well the first time doing it. It takes years.
That's a fair point. Yeah. It takes practice just like anything else.
Now the other element I think I found common in startups is that like trying to get everyone to drink the Kool-Aid and make sure that Kool-Aid still tastes really good.
Relatively good.
Yeah. That's a hard part. I
Yeah.
think that's a difficult, it's something that you don't normally get at other companies because like you as in the founders, upper management, they have to like keep manufacturing that Kool-Aid and they have to like keep distributing it and pouring it out there because that's a currency that they have, because you don't have the currency of like super high pay or stock options like Google or Apple or whatever. You don't have work-life balance, but you have this dream that you're trying to sell and this opportunity and this Kool-Aid that will kind of keep you fueled and energized. And throughout the life of a startup, there'll be times where that Kool-Aid starts to sour or even taste really terrible.
I recently read this book called The E-Myth, and it talks about 3 different mindsets. You got the entrepreneur, the manager, and then the worker. And so like each person has one of those 3 people inside them, depending on which role they're into. How is you as a manager take that entrepreneur's vision, their Kool-Aid, and turn it into something practical? Because this is a vision, right? Yeah. It's very nebulous. They don't necessarily give you the directions on how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
But that's where your job comes in. How would you affect that change, that your people below you, your workers?
Yeah. I mean, what I try to do is to instill that we are a team and that the things that we do here affect other people. Yeah. Of course, we have to do things for ourselves as well. Like we want our personal career growth. We want to do good in our role and jobs. People want to get recognized, but we're also a team and we have to kind of think that way. And also a lot of times I convey that you're here for a reason because you were either selected or hired because of your great skills. You could be anywhere else, but we want you and you're here because you can add a lot of value and your skills are very valuable to us. And you also have, I may not put it this bluntly, but it's like I've had to tell some of my employees, like, you do have 2 choices, work here or not work here. It is a free country and it's a at-will employment state. One of my philosophies in life, not focus or get infuriated with the things that I don't have control of and focus more on the things that I do have control of.
That's a good thing.
And I think I find that sometimes employees will do the opposite. They get very fixated on the things that they don't have control of and the things that infuriate them. Like in a lot of things in life, there's bad situations, bad things that happen, but they're also only as bad as you react to them. Like you can,
that's something you can control too.
You can, when you get a flat tire, you can scream and get really frustrated and roll up into a ball, or take a deep breath and figure out what's the best way to solve this. And that maybe it's a perfectly good thing. It's like, hey, solve this problem and move on.
How did you do the opposite direction? Or like take like the practicality of like, no. I appreciate your vision. I appreciate what's going on, but I would recommend we do this or however that goes because of the feedback.
I'm trying to understand. Are you saying like, even if I'm a manager,
you're stuck in the middle, right? So you take that vision and make sure it works down to the team and they're, be able to produce from it.
Yeah.
But then how do you take the feedback from the team? It's like the day-to-day ins and outs. And how do you take that back up to the other end to make sure that feedback loop?
I guess when I think about that question, or I'm trying to connect the dots, and it's all about connecting the dots and trying to convey and communicate up and down and sideways and up, and kind of like get a feel for, sometimes leadership works. I'm going to operate that way.
Okay.
Because that's just like, we either don't have time and we don't make decisions by consensus here.
Okay.
Because it doesn't typically work, especially in a startup.
Yeah.
And there'll be times where it's like, let's achieve some consensus. This is important. I have a feeling that like some of these folks have a good idea, but there are times where I think the challenge, especially as a leader or manager, is that like a lot of times your employees, whether they report directly to you or indirectly, they may not know the whole context, and they may hear that we're going to switch from material A to B. And to their eyes, like, oh, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Right.
And, it's more expensive, has a longer lead time. Now we have to redo all this work. But if you tell them that, there's going to be a lot of pushback. But it's better to
big picture it.
Yeah, I try to explain, at least to some extent. Well, here's the reason. You don't know this. The customer for material A is gone. They only want material B. We have to make a decision financially and operationally, and it steer us towards this direction. So there's a bigger picture. I think the more people understand that, they can at least synthesize that and be like, okay,
Okay.
I get it. And they also, I think a lot of individual contributors, they want to feel like they're privy to some of this knowledge. Feels
They
like,
wanna
okay,
contribute.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm getting properly communicated
Yeah.
and not just told like what to do. So
Thanks for listening to the first ever Startup Anthology podcast. Join us next time for another episode in which we will talk to more people who have worked at startups and learn about their unique journeys.